Hi, it's Nikki and welcome back to Live a Little, your cozy corner of the internet where we discuss all of the in-between parts of life, the messy, honest and unfiltered parts where you don't always have that person to talk to about them, but we do it all judgment-free around here. Hi, welcome back. You've got just me again for today's episode. I have a lot to talk about in today's episode. As you would have seen for the title, today we're going to be talking about what it is like when you grieve a version of yourself that you never got to have or you never got to live, or a life you didn't get to have. And how that relates to me is because when I was diagnosed with my condition at 6 years old, I completely changed as a person. So I've been unpicking this a lot in therapy recently, almost doing a second wind of like grief and mourning over this. And I really wanted to unpick that. But before I do, I wanted to do an open tabs. If you don't know what open tabs is, it's basically the tabs that have been open in my head and the things that I can't stop thinking about. So we have the tab I'm loving, the tab that is living rent-free in my head, and the tab I need to close. Tab I'm loving, this is such a silly one, but so real. Sun exposure. I'm loving sun exposure. I said this in another episode, but I will sit in the sun and start my day for 10 minutes just sitting outside in my garden, even if it's not sunny, if it's just daylight, even if it's grey, unfortunately, not when it's raining, obviously, but I'll just sit there, stare towards the sun with my eyes shut and just let the sun hit my face, and I instantly feel more grounded, more ready for the day, and like I've got my vitamin D for the day and the sun exposure when it's few and far between in the UK. I think also since coming back from LA, like I can't stop talking about it, but the fact that there was so much sun there, I think now coming back here, it's like when you go on holiday and then you go back to normalcy, even though I was there for work, the weather difference I think can be really hard for your body to adjust to. And everything has just felt very out of sync. I started my period 3 weeks late. I've been breaking out really badly. Like everything just feels very upside down, which is what I'll get into for the tab that needs closing. So sitting in the sun and starting my day doing that has really help me. It's literally like rotate me towards the light and maybe I'll recover like a sunflower. Okay, a tab living rent free. Listen, even if I didn't want it to live rent free, all of the Coachella shenanigans and Bieberchella, even though it's been a little moment since Coachella now, I feel like there is not one video that hasn't crossed my desk from Coachella, like whether it was out of choice or not. There was something really cool about the fact Justin Bieber was one of the headliners. I did watch his set. I thought it was really cool. I know it's been quite divisive, but I don't remember ever in the past years that Coachella has happened. I've never been. I'm not a festival girly. It's not for me. Although this is the one year where I was like, maybe I could do it. Maybe I could do Coachella. I don't know. But then I heard a few stories from some of my friends in the industry about like there was all that dust in the desert and all of this stuff. And then I'm like, yeah, I don't think I could do a festival. I just don't like being out in the middle of nowhere and feeling like I can't leave. Like I hate that feeling, and festivals feel like that massively. But I've never, ever, ever seen a Coachella that has had more coverage than this year's, probably because of the Justin Bieber of it all. I feel like it's been really interesting to like see it all the commentary around it. And so that's been something that's living rent free in my head. Another thing that I'm kind of like, do I talk about this? Do I not? Because I'm scared. I've told Poppy, my producer, because I tell Poppy everything, I might have a little crush. I might have a crush, and I'm kind of scared to talk about it because I'm like, one, maybe this person listens to my podcast. Like, I literally don't know. And two, am I delusional? Is this someone that's just being friendly, or is it a crush? I've spent so long today showing Poppy all of the receipts and being like, what do you think? You know, I can never tell. But it's quite fun to have a crush. It's so funny how someone who like didn't really add anything to your life can suddenly become so important once they like become a part of your like world and your inner circle. This is just someone that I've like known for a little while but have been talking to more. I'm going to keep it very broad, even though I want to be like, his name is blah 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 blah. I'm not doing that because right now it's nothing. But I've not had a crush for so long, and it's really nice to just have someone to talk to that I'm kind of a bit like, ooh, like this is nice, even if it's literally nothing and we're just, you know, getting along as friends. But it's so funny how like someone can like a post of yours or like a story or reply to a message, and before you'd be like, oh, they've liked my story, or like, oh, they've replied to my message, and like not really see it as like replying to it as a sense of urgency, or even like acknowledge that they liked something that you did. But when they start to matter or like be of interest in your life, you instantly are like, oh, have they replied yet? Or like, oh, they like my story. Oh my God. Oh my, like, what does that mean? You know, you read into everything. It's kind of like, you know, when you talk about something that you like never discussed before, and then suddenly it's everywhere. Like, you're like, oh my God, now it's become part of my like world, and I'm aware of this, and I'm conscious about this. I'm now seeing it everywhere. It's like that. Just living a little rent free in my head. And a tab I need to close. My sleeping pattern is abysmal. Like, it's the only way I can put it. I genuinely think at this point I might need to go to like a sleep clinic, because it's so bad that there is just no sense of routine. I think a massive part of that also is I went to LA. It was very go, go, go. It was 7 hours behind the UK. And I feel like I just have felt so out of sync and out of sorts. And as a result, my sleep has really suffered. I've always been an insomniac. I've always kind of had to take melatonin sometimes, or like my sleep hygiene, which is all the things you kind of do to try and make your sleep better, has always been something that I've like tried to prioritize. And I'm not a happy bunny if I don't get a good amount of sleep, also because I need to recharge for my health sake and my mental sake, like we all do, but me more than most because of my condition. And so my sleep has just been stressing me out so much, to be honest. Like every week in therapy, my therapist starts by being like, so how's your week been? And I'm like, I'm tired. I've not slept. I've had 3 hours of sleep. And it's just like a vicious cycle. And it's so pissing me off because I just want to get a good night's sleep. And I think a lot of it is to do with there's a lot in my head. And sometimes when someone is like, okay, now you need to go to sleep. This is the time of day where everyone around you is sleeping. Now you sleep. It feels like there's so much pressure on it that then my body has an inability to sleep. Whereas like, say I wanted to have a little nap in the day, go to sleep instantly. I think it's something to do with the pressure of it. I don't know. Need to unpick that a bit more. But basically, yeah, there's no routine. I wake up feeling so groggy, and just it then means it doesn't set me out to have a good day. It's just it's not it. And I feel like I'm genuinely doing everything that I might just actually need to go to a sleep clinic. But anyway, speaking of things we are carrying around longer than we should, today's episode is, like I said, about grieving the life that you never got to have. I think for a long time I mistook grief and missing something as nostalgia, because nostalgia sounds softer. It sounds more like, oh, you know, like I look back and I that was such a nice time of life. It almost sounds lovely in a sad sort of way. It's like you've lived something beautiful enough or valuable enough to actually mean that it is worth missing. You know, some people don't have nostalgia from like their childhood, for example, because their childhood was not a happy time. So nostalgia is a privilege in a way, because it means there was nothing to miss. So that's why I mistook nostalgia for that. And of course, there's parts of nostalgia from my childhood. But actually, as I've unpicked it more and I've become a bit more self-aware and got a slightly wider kind of emotion vocabulary, it's actually grief and loss. Because it's not just something that I'm missing, it's something that I had. And I'm grieving what has been taken away. I'm grieving the blanks of my life and the parts of my story that never got to be filled in the way they should have been. When I was 6 years old and I got diagnosed with my condition, my life and me as a person changed in an instant. When something so world-shattering happens to you, especially, you know, in an example of grief, whether you're grieving you because of something that happened or someone else, your loved one, your life can never be the same. I'd say my life is kind of defined in like the before I was aware of my condition and the after I was aware of my condition and started, you know, having it impact my life. There's only those two parts, and I kind of live in between those two parts. I feel like I've not really been able to fully be a part of the life that I'm in now, because I'm constantly looking behind me in my rearview mirror of what once was, not what is now. And if I look at what is now, I just get even more upset about what once was, that I feel like I have recently been having in therapy. And also as I've got older, you know, I'm 21 now, still very young, I know, but I've been through more than most people will in a lifetime. I have. I've had 98 operations from 6 years old to now 21. And for a lot of my life in that period, it has felt like my only reason for really operating and being on earth is have a surgery, recover from the surgery, repeat. Like, I was a sick child. My purpose as a child was to be this sick child that did sick child things, had treatment, stayed in hospital, never saw her friends, was in pain, got picked up from school if she ever got to go because she wasn't well, had a nosebleed, called an ambulance. That was my life and has been my life for so long that, of course, I'm going to grieve things that were beginning to happen and what once was before those things took a hold of my life. And look, it's not to say that my life is not full now. My life is not worthy now. Of course it is. And if anything, now I have so much more onus on the small things in my life because of what I've been through. On the basis of that, I appreciate those little things even more. Yeah, sure, I went to the Oscars, but do I really care about that on the, if I reduce it to like what matters in life for me? Of course not. Not at all. My relationships matter. Who I am as a person matters. How I feel as a person matters. That's what matters to me, not these shiny things, as exciting or cool as they are. But as I've got older and my perception of what I've been through has become a little bit less kind of I'm in it and slightly more I can look at it from a bird's eye view of everything I've been through. At the beginning of my therapy, actually, when I started with my therapist for my treatment for PTSD and just therapy, my therapist and I made a timeline from 2010 when I got diagnosed with my condition all the way up until present day. And these were just the main major things that have happened in my life that would have somehow altered my brain chemistry and my perception of life and the way I act and the way I am, and probably given me trauma. We laid out and named and numbered out of 10 every single thing that's happened that would have been a traumatic event for me, and it was 3 pages long. And we named each one from 2010 to now. That is 16 years of things. And yeah, we ranked them from 1 out of 10 to 10 out of 10. And when I looked at that, it was like a fuck me. Like, I can't believe I've been through all of this. Because my therapist often says, Nikki, you talk about your trauma and the things you've been through like a shopping list. Like, I'll be like, oh yeah, I was in a coma and I had a 12-hour surgery and this happened and that happened and that happened. I nearly died. And I'll list it almost like there's no emotional connection to it because I've tried my best to be so far removed from these things because of trauma and because I've dissociated from them a little bit and because they're so big and so scary and so impactful that I don't want to go there. So by me kind of listing it as these trivial things when they're so the opposite of trivial, they're life altering, that is how I cope, is by being slightly removed from them, like I'm talking about another person, but it is all in fact me. And as I've been going through this process of treatment, it's made me really upset for my younger self, even more than my present self, actually. Like, my present self, I'm very aware of the issues I have as a result of everything I've been through, and also just being a human at the face value of that. But it makes me so, like, every single time I talk about my younger self in a conversation with people, just normally, or especially with my therapist, when you get that kind of like feeling in your throat, like you're about to cry, like that massive lump and you're just trying not to cry. As soon as I think about my younger self and what I've been through, like even now I'm like, oh, it makes me want to cry because I feel so maternal and protective over that child who kind of had this monster introduced into her life, aka my condition, and got so many things that make childhood feel full taken away from her that it's just not fair. And I think at that time in my life, I was so young that I didn't really have the understanding of life to understand that, one, it wasn't fair, and two, it wasn't normal. My world was so much smaller that, of course, I knew it wasn't normal. I knew other kids were going to school 5 days a week, seeing friends, playing sports, had activities they were doing, lived majority a normal, happy life as an average child. And that was me until 6 years old. And I was such an active and chatty child. I was in every single club you could think of. I was the most extroverted, outgoing person you could ever meet. And of course, we all have elements of our younger selves still within us. They don't just vanish. They change, they evolve, they form differently, they adapt. But there is a massive part of me that now I've had this second wind of grief as I've got older and more aware and perceptive of what happened and has happened to me. that it's very, very difficult for me to be present or look forward to the future when I'm so hell bent on the past. The past me, the version of me that I didn't get to protect, that I couldn't have protected, honestly. Nothing could have protected me or can protect me from the monster that is my condition. But I just wish I could have sat with my younger self. I think we all wish we could do this when we've gone through things at a young age and just sat with her through it all. I sat with myself through it all, but I blacked out and blanked out a lot of my childhood based on what I've been through. For every 6 to 8 weeks for 4.5 years, I was going to America for medical treatment year after year after year. I've spent Christmases in hospital, days that should be so exciting and wondrous for a child. I nearly had to spend my birthday in hospital. I've spent birthdays bleeding, having nosebleeds. Events that should be exciting were ripped away from me at a very early age and turned into something else. And so I grieve the life that I could have lived as a child. And because of that, I really struggle to think about the future or even be present in the current, because the only thing that I feel assured in is the past, because it's happened. A lot of us think about the past because it's said and done. There isn't as many what ifs because it's done. And so therefore you can replay all of the terms of events and interpret them 100 times differently because it's done. Whereas the future feels scary because it's unknown, and the current feels scary because you're living in it. And a lot of us want to escape our current. Sometimes I feel like Nikki, that was 6 years old, something was taken away so prematurely. And as the years have gone on, any memories from before my AVM actually feel more and more distant to me. And that is its own kind of grief too. A lot of our family videos up until the age of 6 years old, I look like a normal child. I'm so happy. I'm dressing up, I'm dancing, doing childlike things with that childlike wonder. I thought when I'd watched our family videos recently that I'd be like, oh, this is so cute. But actually, it gave me that even deeper sense of sadness for myself, because that is a child and a person that no longer exists. Of course, it's still me, but it's not, because my life has completely and utterly changed in trajectory on the basis of me becoming ill. And that illness never leaving me. Of course it's different, but it's kind of similar to grieving a loved one. The memories get blurrier over the years, and that person feels further away from what you once remembered because they were right here with you. And then you strain even tighter and tighter to hold on to what they sound like, what they feel like, who they were before everything changed. Except that loved one in my life is me. And at the same time, I feel like so much of my work now is supposed to be about learning how to look forward, how to build a future, how to keep going for the version of me that exists ahead of all of this, the future me. But I think that's what makes it so hard, is that I still feel so emotionally turned towards the younger version of me, the one I wish I could go back and protect. I feel stunted. I sometimes feel like I'm stuck between this in-between, this middle ground grey area of the child me and the adult me, where I'm trying to live in the present. I'm trying so hard to, but sinking a bit into both directions, and if anything, the past. I think nostalgia gets spoken about in this kind of soft, warm way as sentimental and as, do you remember the days? But, like missing an old song or a bedroom or a friendship or an older version of yourself in a sweet, harmless way. And I think that's why I called this nostalgia, because grief felt a bit too sharp or strong, and it felt like, how can you grieve someone that's still living, aka yourself? Nostalgia suggests that you had something that you now miss. But for me, so much of this feeling is about grief of what I have missed, what got interrupted, what never got the chance to fully happen, the blanks of my life I never got to fill in. And I think that's why it hurts so much in a particular way, because it is not only grief for a younger person and version of me, it is grief for the fact that she feels further away year after year. And there is something so painful about grieving someone who is still technically you, but who feels more and more unreachable with time. Not just that I lost parts of my life, but I'm losing the closeness to a version of me who existed before that loss too. When you get sick young, that life splits itself into the before and the after, and that changes your relationship with time forever, because I define my time and my age with the chapters of my sickness in life and my treatment. That is how I honestly define years of my life. I have held on to the treatment I've had in each of those periods or the catastrophic events, because you hold on to what was most big in times of your life, not the little everyday ordinary things. And I think one of the reasons I've held on to the past so tightly is because I've held on to who I was before I got sick. And not just because she was younger, not just because she was little, but because she represents something so much bigger than that. She represents innocence, she represents ease, a version of life that has not yet been interrupted in that way that it was when I turned 6. That innocence of knowing that this impending doom isn't coming. She didn't know what would change, and she didn't know that life, my body and time was something that I would suddenly have to be forced to be so aware of. And I think when I miss her, I'm not only missing an earlier version of me, I'm missing the feeling of life still being open in a particular way, untouched in a particular way, unbroken in a particular way that you should as a child. Because once something enters your life that early, you can never really unknow it. And sometimes I think I spent years emotionally circling that younger version of myself because she feels like the last moment of innocence in my life before everything got so hard or complicated. And so I'm grieving the childhood I didn't have. I think that is what makes this especially painful, is that I'm not only grieving the childhood I had and was living, I'm grieving the childhood I didn't get to have. And that kind of grief is really hard to explain unless you've lived in that, because it can sound invisible. Like, how can you grieve things that you never had? And it can sound like you're mourning something that is actually kind of technically not real because it's not happened. But I think grief really is that. I grieve the childhood I didn't have. And, because it was real, because it mattered, that is why I grieve it. And grief for the childhood that maybe could have unfolded differently if my illness hadn't entered so early. The version that felt lighter, the version that mattered and had more ordinary parts of it. The version that might have had a different shape, a different rhythm, a different texture. And maybe that's why this kind of grief can feel so lonely sometimes, because it isn't only grief for what happened, it's grief for what didn't get a chance to happen. And how do you explain aching for a version of your life that only lives in the possibility? Because I think a lot of us do this. We grieve unlived versions of our lives all the time. And when that unlived version begins in childhood, it burrows even deeper into your identity and your life. Because of all of that, I've clung to the past so tightly, not because I'm weak, not because I'm dramatic or I'm hell-bent on, if only, but because the past is what has felt familiar to me, and the past hurts, but I know what lives there now because it's said and done. I know the people that were there. I know the rooms that were there. I know the versions of me that were there, good and bad. And future events have felt hard to trust. And then, of course, the past starts to feel magnetic because it's done. And if I've kind of lived every day not really being able to see a future when the current feels so hard, the future is not something I want to live in. And so I think sometimes we hold on to the past because it feels like proof that those versions of us existed, proof that something mattered, proof that what we lost was real. I revisited old versions of myself, old feelings, old memories, because parts of me have been trying to preserve them. As if remembering them hard enough, if I think really, really hard with my eyes shut, which is part of what I'm doing in therapy, that might just keep them alive. As if staying emotionally close to them means they weren't fully taken away from me. But memory can become a place you live within, and only within. And that's when it becomes hard. Because then there's an inability to look forward, to look at the future as something that is exciting or hopeful. And that is the cost of clinging to the past for so long, is that it becomes really hard to look forward. And this is something I've been thinking about a lot recently, especially in my therapy, because a lot of my work in it has been trying to find a reason to get up each day, when each day feels so hard. It feels like trying to push a boulder up a mountain that is inevitably going to fall back down, and you're going to have to start at square one again. A lot of us feel that way about life. A lot of my work in therapy has been, trying to find something to keep moving for, trying to make life feel a little less heavy. And when I can't find that reason for my present self, which is difficult, my therapist will sometimes say, then do it for a 44-year-old version of you. Do it for her. Do it because maybe she will be grateful you kept going. So you wake up for her. And I understand that, and I understand the logic of trying to borrow hope from the future version of yourself when the current version of yourself can't hold it on her own. But that's so much harder for me because what has made me sad is so much of what I've been working through in therapy has to do with my younger self. That's where my trauma lies. And so, with how much I wish I could go back and run towards and protect her, tell her none of it was her fault, that she deserves, she didn't deserve this. She deserves softness. She deserves ease. She deserves all the magic that she hopes for. She deserves to be a fairy if she wants to, or a princess. I end up feeling stuck in this strange place in the past when kind of being asked to look forward, to live for the future, to trust the older version of me. But emotionally, so much of me is still turned towards the younger version of me. And I think that's why I feel like I'm almost literally in quicksand, because I'm trying to move forwards towards the future, but I'm still grieving the past so heavily that the present version of myself is being swallowed in this quicksand in the middle of kind of like the past is here, the future is there, and the past is just kind of dragging me back down because it's where a big part of me still lives. So even when I try not to think about it, there is still this part of me wondering, what is 21-year-old Nikki like as a healthy person? 22-year-old Nikki like? 23-year-old Nikki? Who is she? How does she move through the world? How does she find an ease? What kind of life does she have? And I honestly don't think that that will ever be something that fully goes away, because those aren't hypothetical questions for me. They feel like versions of me I have been grieving in real time because they began to live till 6. And I think because of that, I've spent the majority of my life looking more in the rearview mirror than what is actually massively widely in front of me. That tiny rearview mirror has meant so much more. I get so caught up in the past being the only thing that matters, the only thing that makes sense, the only thing present, that I'm so often looking behind me and never really in the current. And the future doesn't feel like something I want to run towards. It feels like a scary road I don't always want to keep walking down. So I end up in this awful in-between, wishing years of my life away while clinging to something and someone who's already gone. And I think that's the trap of it. The past feels like the only thing that makes sense. The present feels hard to inhabit, and the future feels frightening. So where are you meant to live? And that's where I think the grief has caught up with me later, as I've got older, because when I was younger, yes, I was so sad, and I wasn't doing normal childlike things. I knew I was missing out on things, but I was also so young. And so I had a bit of distance to not fully understand the weight of what was happening around me. I also didn't have a phone and social media showing me everything that people are doing who are living healthy lives. So I just survived it, adapted to it, I thought, as best as I could, and accepted things that I should have never, ever had to in a life that I never deserved. And I think now that I'm older and naturally more protective and more maternal towards not just myself and who did exist, but people around me, the person I feel most protective over is the younger version of me, because now I can see her clearly as just a scared, sad child. And I think a lot of my grief is for her. It's almost me trying to fight a fight and fight back something that she never did. She just kind of let happen to her. And it's the things that I never fully took in at the time have now caught up with me, as they often do with traumatic events. And that's the shift I'm trying to make now, not becoming someone who never looks back. I don't think there will ever be a version of me that won't be able to just look back. I will always have this tenderness towards my younger self and younger versions of me, and I think I'll always grieve what she carried, what she lost, and what she never got to have, and who she wasn't protected by, even though there were things that she couldn't get protected from. And I think part of this too is that I've been trying to hold on to that childlike wonder we all try to keep hold of, the openness and the innocence and the magic that is to be a child, the feeling that life is still something you meet with wide eyes and rose-tinted glasses. I think everyone in some way feels that life and that innocence is slipping away from them the older they get. But I think the difference for me is that life happened to me so young in such a catastrophic, saddening way. I wish I could hold on to the I want to be a fairy when I grow up part. And that got pulled away from me far too soon and shouldn't have happened, and it wasn't fair. So sometimes I feel a bit frozen there. Like, in my heart of hearts, I'm still the 6-year-old girl. And for a long time, I think I've confused holding on to her with protecting her. But I don't actually think it's doing me any favors now, because there's a difference between honoring that little girl and staying emotionally stunted and trapped beside her in that life and world. And maybe the hardest thing I'm learning is that I will never fully make sense of what has happened to me. I think the only way I can appreciate it and accept it now is to admit that I can't make sense of it. And I think part of this too is that I'll never be able to justify what has happened to me because it wasn't logical. It was illogical. It wasn't fair. And like so many things that happen to us in life, it wasn't okay. I think because of that, I've never really been able to get the closure I wanted from it, like a relationship that, just ended suddenly, because there is no neat closure that I can kind of file away as like, okay, yeah, this is why this happened, because I'm also still living in it. And the triggers are still within me. I still have my condition that triggered all of this. So there's no explanation to wrap this all up properly as a story that's got an ending, because I'm still living in it while also having a version of me that has ended. It's like a stuck music CD. It keeps trying to spin, trying to move forwards, go to the next part of the song, but it stays caught up and stuck in the same part over and over again, sticking. And I think that is what grief is. It can feel like that sometimes, of having no real closure, not just sadness, but repetition, going back to the same place, the same questions, the same ache, because there was never an answer big enough or just enough to settle your question. Some things are just heartbreaking and unfair, and maybe healing is not finally understanding why it happened, but maybe it's learning how to live beside the fact that you never will. Maybe the way I go back, for her now is not by living stuck there forever, but maybe it's living in a way that honors her, which I'm trying my best to do now. Maybe it's by becoming someone she would have needed, someone safe, someone gentle, someone who stays, and someone who keeps going when she isn't able to. And maybe that's where my therapist is trying to get me to look when she talks about the 44-year-old version of me. Maybe the point is not to choose between my younger self and my future self and say that I have to think with one or the other. Maybe the point is to let the present version of me become the bridge between them. The person who can look back with compassion and forward just enough to keep hope moving. The person who can say, I can't save this little girl by, disappearing into grief, but I can love her by giving her a life. So that is kind of what I wanted to say in this, as I think so many of us can feel this in so many different ways. Maybe you have lost a person in your life, or you have lost a version of yourself based on your circumstances, or an illness. Maybe it's a job you didn't get to have, so many things. And our whole life will constantly be a stream of what if, what could have not. That is how we live our life, if, buts, and maybes. The difference between mine is that mine is something that began to start and began to have life. So it's like another version of a human sat beside me that suddenly just got ended at 6, So my little thought of the week is I actually want to leave you with another theory. This is the fig tree theory, and you may actually know it already, especially if you are an introspective, existential person like me. It comes from The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, and the basic idea is that if your life is a fig tree, every fig on it is a different future, a different version of you, a different life you could have lived. And the paradox of life is that you can't have them all. You can't eat every fig. So choosing one means inevitably losing another. And I think you can apply that to so many parts of life. Loss, jobs, money, family, freedom, relationships, health, and all of the in-betweens, all of it. It's not just about career or big decisions. It's about the grief of unlived lives too. Unlived versions that didn't happen. The paths that closed. The futures that didn't get chosen or didn't get a chance to be for whatever reason. For your own, your own choices or something that was out of your control. And I think that's why it has stayed with me, because for me, it's not just that I couldn't pick every fig. It is that some of them feel like they were pulled off by something that was out of my control and way too soon. The well version of me, the version of me who got to grow up differently, the version of me who trusted the future more easily, the version of me who maybe didn't spend so much of her life looking in her rearview mirror, they all got pulled off. And so the fig I was left with was not the one I would have chosen, And I think that's what I've realized is you can't live if you don't grieve. Not because grief is all there is in life. Grief is one of the things I think we fear most as humans. But because grief is what love looks like when something has been lost. Grief is what matters when something mattered. When someone mattered, or when a version of your life mattered. And maybe living is not avoiding the grief. Maybe it is letting it move through you without letting it become the only place you live. So in conclusion, I think maybe the question underneath all of this and everything I've spoken about, underneath nostalgia, underneath the grief, underneath the looking back, underneath the fear of looking forward, underneath the how can I, hope for the future when I'm so scared to live in the current, is how do you live when a part of you has died? Or another person you loved is no longer here to live alongside you? Because I think that's what this has felt like in some ways. Not all of me, not my whole life, but as part of me, a part of being, a part of seeing the world, a part of, a little girl who thought life was magical and open-ended and soft around the edges and a fairy tale. A little girl who got to say, I want to be a fairy when I grow up, and mean it. And that got pulled away from me too soon. And that wasn't fair. And I think for a long time, I have tried to solve that, tried to understand it, tried to fully make sense of it. And if I couldn't, I'd then completely internalize that and blame myself for it because my condition lives inside of me. I've been able to create some space from it to understand that my condition is another monster, another person, and I've not inflicted this on myself. But unfortunately, I can't really ever have space from it because it lives within me. It is me. And so I think the only way I can kind of make sense of it now is to admit that I can't. That some things are just heartbreaking and unfair and unjust, and there is no amount of reflection or replaying that will ever turn them into something fair or neat. So maybe the question is not, how do I get that part of me back? Because I likely can't. I can try to reconnect with her and things she once loved, but maybe the question is, how do I live now? Knowing she existed, knowing she mattered, knowing I loved her, knowing part of me still aches for her and is sad for her. I think maybe the answer is not to stop grieving her because I can't. We're all human. We all grieve. Grieving is loving. But maybe it's to stop abandoning the rest of my life in the process. Maybe it's to let grief be something I carry, not something I permanently live with. Maybe it's to honor what died without acting like nothing in me is still alive. Because that is the other truth of it. Part of me did die that day I got diagnosed with my condition. But not all of me, because I wouldn't be sat here talking to you. And so maybe healing for all of us is now being able to hold on to both of those truths at once. To say, yes, something in me ended too soon. It did. Yes, I will always grieve her. Yes, it changed me forever in ways that I never would have wanted it to. But I'm still here. And the version of me that is still here deserves more than a life spent only looking backwards. She deserves presence. She deserves tenderness. She deserves the chance to become someone too. And maybe that is what living is after this kind of loss. Not moving on as if it never happened, not forcing it into a lesson or toxic positivity, not pretending it all worked out for the best and everything happens for a reason. It doesn't when you grieve something that should have never happened. But it's just learning slowly how to keep going when part of you did not get to come with you. I hope you found this validating if you have felt this way in any way. For me, this was a very cathartic episode because it's something that I'm really deep and living in and in the thick of at the moment is redefining what grief looks like and how you build hope for the future when you feel like you've lost the past. But yeah, I am still her. She is still me. It's just about finding the way to reconnect. So I love you all. Thank you for sitting with me for this one. And as always, remember to be kind to yourself and live a little. Bye.